The funeral rehearsal was 3 days away, but the hall sat empty except for one man. Gregory Vance walked to the back row where a stack of memorial programs had been placed for tomorrow's rehearsal.
Let's see who actually bothered to RSVP for my brother-in-law.
He flipped past the cover and scanned the list of tributes. The first name stopped his smirk cold. Dedication of the Charlotte Carter Memorial Wing, funded anonymously by Stephen Collier, and now publicly acknowledged for the first time. The name Charlotte hit Gregory like a physical blow. His jaw went slack.
Charlotte. God, no. Not her. Not my little girl.
His shoulders began to heave. The program crumpled in his fist. In the vast, silent hall, Gregory Vance wept for everything he had ever gotten wrong. 3 months earlier, in a quiet doctor's office, Stephen Collier listened to the verdict he'd been expecting.
Your lung cancer is advanced, Stephen. 10 months, perhaps, if we're being honest.
Thank you for your candor, Deborah. 10 months is a gift if you know how to spend it.
The scan on the light board showed the mass that would take him, but his expression stayed serene. That evening, he told Margaret. Her hand found his before the last word left his mouth.
A living memorial? Stephen, no. We should fight this, not plan your funeral.
It's not a funeral. It's a celebration. I want to be there to hear what people say about my life.
I can't lose you. I'm not ready for this.
I'm not ready either, but I want to choose how I'm remembered. Please, Margaret, trust me on this.
And so, Stephen Collier began planning his living memorial, determined to fill his remaining months with meaning. 2 days later, Margaret's brother Gregory arrived without an invitation, as he always did.
So I hear you're throwing yourself a pre-funeral party, Stephen. Seems a bit optimistic.
I prefer to call it a living memorial, Gregory. People should celebrate while they can.
Celebrate what? A quiet life in a small house? Who's coming? The mailman.
Gregory, please. This is important to him. Don't make it harder than it already is.
This will be the saddest event in history. I need to see it fall apart. Let me help you plan it, Stephen. I've got experience organizing these things. Make sure it's respectable.
Thank you, Gregory. I'd appreciate your perspective. We'll make it a day to remember.
Gregory's smirk returned. He saw an opportunity to confirm 40 years of contempt. Stephen saw him to the door, expression unchanged. But inside, he was already writing the first invitation. Gregory arrived early the next morning with a list of cost-cutting suggestions.
We'll use the small conference room at the community center. Keep it simple. No need for a hall when only a handful will show.
If a few come, they'll be comfortable. If more appear, they'll feel welcome.
More? He's delusional. This guy's funeral will look like a closed rehearsal.
Stephen placed a thick stack of cream envelopes on his desk that evening, each addressed in careful cursive.
Stephen, are you sure about this? Gregory's watching, and he'll be cruel if few respond.
Trust the seeds, Margaret. I planted them long before Gregory ever opened his mouth.
Don't clear your calendar for Stephen's big send-off. It'll be me, Margaret, and maybe the neighbor's cat.
The invitations went out. Gregory checked the RSVP board daily, grinning at the blank screen. Stephen watched and said nothing. The address list he'd copied from his private ledger was decades long. The digital RSVP board went live at the venue entrance, a public counter set to 0.
As expected, Stephen's celebration will be an echo chamber.
By the end of the first week, 3 names appeared. Local acquaintances, nothing remarkable. Gregory checked and grinned.
Told you, the man knew nobody worth knowing.
But Margaret visited the hall and paused before the screen, her finger tracing one entry.
That name? Isn't that the retired judge who spoke at the Rotary Club? Why would he attend?
Gregory, passing by, noticed her hesitation but dismissed it.
Don't read too much into it, Margaret. Probably a courtesy RSVP. He'll forget by next week.
She didn't argue, but something had shifted. The list was longer than Gregory realized. Stephen at home received a quiet phone call. He listened, smiled, and said nothing. The RSVP board refreshed one afternoon, and two names made the venue coordinator stop and stare.
Judge Alan Holbrook? What would a retired federal judge want with a man who never left his zip code?
The second name was Claire Ashford. Gregory's coffee went cold as he reread it.
These can't be real RSVPs. They're pity acceptances, old men returning a favor, nothing more.
But Margaret was already dialing Stephen, her voice curious but cautious.
Stephen, honey, Judge Holbrook and Claire Ashford are on your RSVP list. You never mentioned knowing people like that.
Alan was a young lawyer I sponsored through law school. Claire's first charity grant was a check I signed.
She pressed the phone to her heart. She'd known he was kind, but not that the world owed him debts.
Gregory, hovering in the kitchen doorway, heard every word. He didn't smirk now. He just turned and left. On his desk, Stephen added 2 fresh cards to the growing stack, as if he'd expected nothing less. The board refreshed. Former U.S. Ambassador John Crawford. Former U.S. Ambassador Elena Vasquez. Marcus Dean, founder and CEO of Hudson Logistics, Fortune 200. David Chen, Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist.
This can't be real. Stephen Collier doesn't know people like this. He's a nobody.
Gregory stared at the screen until the security guard asked if he needed help. He couldn't answer. The tally crossed 60 names, far beyond the small conference room Gregory had booked.
Stephen, Ambassador Crawford, Elena Vasquez, Marcus Dean. Who are these people? Why would they come?
John was a junior diplomat I mentored. Elena's father was my oldest friend. The others, just seeds I watered long ago.
Gregory, listening from the hall, felt the floor tilt. Stephen wasn't small. He was hidden.
He said Stephen would die broke, but this guest list, it's the proof that every taunt was a lie.
The memorial had become a reckoning, and Gregory Vance wasn't ready for what came next. 3 weeks before the memorial, Stephen sat with Margaret in their living room, the program draft spread across his knees.
There's one more piece I want in this program, Margaret. A dedication at the end.
A dedication? To what?
A children's hospital wing. It's been funded anonymously for decades. I think it's time the name was spoken aloud.
Which hospital, Stephen? And why keep it secret all this time?
That story is for another day. But trust me, Margaret, when it's read, some scars will finally heal.
She nodded, though the question lingered in her eyes.
Every time I close my eyes, I see those names mocking me. Ambassador, CEO, Pulitzer winner.
He poured a third glass, the amber proof that 40 years of scorn were crumbling. The venue was ready. Programs waited at the entrance, and the last line, unseen by Gregory, held the truth that would break him. That night, Gregory sat alone in his living room, the whiskey bottle untouched. He hadn't had a drink since the last glass 2 days ago.
I need to see that list again. Make sure I didn't imagine it. Maybe it's all a mistake.
He drove to the venue as dusk fell, the parking lot empty, the hall door unlocked for tomorrow's setup. Inside, the hall was silent. Rows of empty chairs faced the stage. On a side table, a printed guest list lay beside the programs. Gregory picked it up, his hand trembling. He scanned the list from top to bottom. Ambassador John Crawford, former Ambassador Elena Vasquez, Marcus Dean, founder of Hudson Logistics, David Chen, Pulitzer Prize winner.
Every name is a judgment. I called him small life, small bank account. He was 10 times the man I am.
He stood there for a long moment, the tablet shaking in his grip. Then he placed it back, careful not to disturb the programs, and walked out into the night. Tomorrow, the rehearsal. But Gregory Vance knew one thing for certain. Stephen Collier was not the man he had spent a lifetime mocking. The rehearsal evening came, cool and quiet. The hall lay still, chairs arranged, stage lit with soft spotlights. Gregory arrived early, walking down the center aisle alone, his footsteps echoing on the polished floor.
I've already seen the guest list. There's nothing left that can surprise me.
A stack of memorial programs sat on the chair beside him. He picked one up, its cover elegant and understated. He flipped to the order of events. The first section was titled simply, Tributes. Tributes by Ambassador John Crawford, former Ambassador Elena Vasquez, Marcus Dean, founder of Hudson Logistics, David Chen, Pulitzer Prize winner.
4 speakers, each one a giant, and they came for Stephen.
His hands began to shake. The fine paper crinkled under his tightening grip.
I called him small life, small bank account, but the whole world showed up to speak for him.
And then, at the very bottom of the page, a line that had not been on any guest list. A single sentence that made no sense at first. Gregory stared at the tribute list, each name a silent judgment: Ambassador Crawford, Ambassador Vasquez, Marcus Dean, David Chen.
Ambassadors, a CEO, a Pulitzer winner, all for a man I called a failure.
His hands trembled as he read David Chen's name, the last of the speakers. The paper crinkled under his grip.
How did that old man know these people? What did I miss?
40 years of insults dissolved in the silent hall, replaced by a sickening weight of wrongness.
He said I'd die broke, but the whole world showed up to speak for him. I was the bankrupt one.
Then his eye caught the line at the bottom of the page, a hospital wing dedication, funded anonymously by Stephen.
A hospital wing? Stephen never mentioned anything about a hospital.
He turned the page. The full dedication filled the paper, a name at its center that would soon detonate. Gregory Vance had no idea he was about to read his own daughter's name in a dead man's tribute. Gregory's eyes fell to the full dedication, and the room seemed to hold its breath. Dedication of the Charlotte Carter Memorial Wing, funded anonymously by Stephen Collier and now publicly acknowledged for the first time.
Charlotte. No. That's my daughter's name. How could Stephen?
A memory surfaced unbidden. A 6-year-old girl with long braids, holding a toy elephant, smiling in a hospital bed.
Charlotte, my little girl. She died 30 years ago. And Stephen, he never forgot.
The program trembled in his hands. His breath came in short, shallow gasps.
He didn't just fund a wing, he named it after my daughter, the child I couldn't save.
A choked sob escaped him, echoing in the silent hall. The dam broke.
Charlotte, my Charlotte, he remembered her. I never gave him a reason to.
In the empty hall, the man who had mocked Stephen Collier for a lifetime finally understood the measure of the man he had despised. Gregory remained frozen in the back row, shoulders heaving, the only sound his muffled sobs in the vast, empty room. A venue coordinator glanced over, then turned away, granting him the privacy of the unseen.
I spent 4 decades mocking him, and he spent those same decades building a monument to my daughter.
The program lay crumpled on the floor, the dedication page already blurred and torn from his grip.
I called him a small life, small bank account man, but I'm the one who is bankrupt.
He pushed himself up, legs unsteady, and stumbled toward the side door before the rehearsal could begin. No one followed. The few staff members parted silently, their eyes downcast.
Tomorrow I'll have to face Stephen, but tonight I just need to disappear.
Outside, the cool night air did nothing to wash the guilt from his skin. He drove away, the wrecked program on the passenger seat, its last line burning into the darkness. The next morning, Gregory Vance sat in his kitchen, sober for the first time in months, hollowed out by the night before.
No amount of whiskey could erase Charlotte Carter from the program, or the memory of her small hands.
His phone buzzed. Stephen's number glowed on the screen. He let it ring twice, then answered, his voice ragged.
Stephen, I don't know what to say.
Just come over, Gregory. I need to give you something.
Gregory walked to Stephen's house under the pink dawn sky. Every step, a step toward judgment. The front door opened before he could knock. Stephen stood there, thinner than ever, but his eyes kind.
Good morning, Gregory. Come in.
In the kitchen, Stephen held out a sealed cream envelope, Gregory's name written in careful cursive.
What could he possibly have left to say after everything? What could a letter contain?
Gregory took the envelope with trembling fingers, the cream paper cool and weightless in his palm. He slid a finger under the seal and unfolded the paper. Stephen's careful handwriting filled the page. Gregory sat at the kitchen table and began to read, his lips moving silently. Dear Gregory, when Charlotte died in 1991, I watched you bury your daughter and knew you would never be able to afford the memorial she deserved. So I funded the children's wing in silence, in her name, because she was family and I could never forget her laugh. A memory surfaced in Gregory's mind. A younger Stephen kneeling beside a hospital bed, holding Charlotte's small hand.
He was there. Stephen was there, and I never knew. 40 years I mocked him, and he was the only one who remembered my daughter.
The letter went on, but the words blurred. Gregory's shoulders shook, and a low, guttural sound escaped him.
I called him small, but the smallest man in this room has always been me.
Slowly, he raised his head and looked across the table at Stephen, whose calm eyes had been waiting for this moment all along.
Why, Stephen? After all the things I said to you, why would you do this for my daughter?
Because she was family, Gregory. I couldn't save her, but I could make sure the world never forgot her name.
I'm sorry for every insult, every sneer. I was wrong about you my entire life.
Stephen listened, his expression unwavering. Then he said the words Gregory never expected to hear.
Gregory, I'd like you to deliver the eulogy at the memorial. Will you speak for me?
Me? Speak for him? After everything I did? I don't deserve that honor. I don't know what to say, but if you're asking, I'll do it. I'll find the right words.
Stephen reached across the table and covered Gregory's hand with his own. No more words were needed. Gregory rose, the letter still pressed to his chest, and walked to the door. As he walked home under the brightening sky, the weight of the eulogy settled on him, a burden he now carried willingly. Over the days that followed, Gregory sat for hours at his kitchen table, a pen in hand, a blank page before him.
How do I speak for a man I called a failure for 40 years? Every line I write feels hollow.
He shredded 3 drafts before finally letting the words come raw, unguarded, and true. Margaret came by one afternoon and found him asleep at the table, pages scattered. She picked one up. She read a few lines, then pressed the paper to her heart. Tears spilled onto the inked words. She brought the pages to Stephen, who was growing weaker each day. He read slowly, his tired eyes tracing Gregory's handwriting.
He found the right words.
Across town, Gregory rehearsed in his empty apartment, his voice cracking but determined, the words no longer hollow. The morning of the memorial, he dressed in his best jacket, the eulogy folded in his pocket. He paused at the venue entrance, the murmur of arriving guests behind him, and whispered his daughter's name once before stepping inside. The hall filled with the sound of quiet conversation as dignitaries, family, and friends took their seats beneath a warm, golden light. Ambassador Crawford arrived first, greeting Margaret with a gentle embrace before finding his seat among the rows. A magnificent floral arrangement stood at the stage's edge, its card reading, "In celebration of a life well lived." Marcus Dean and David Chen nodded solemnly to each other as they entered, then paused to read the dedication in the program. Then the room hushed as Stephen walked in, leaning on Margaret's arm. His body was thin, but his face glowed with peace. They took their seats at the very front, Margaret's hand never leaving his. The stage waited. Gregory walked to the podium, his footsteps steady, but his heart pounding against his ribs. The folded eulogy was damp in his hand.
This is the hardest thing I've ever done, but I owe him this. I owe Charlotte this.
Stephen caught his eye from the front row and gave the smallest nod. A permission, a thank you.
My name is Gregory Vance, and I am here to speak about a man I was wrong about for 40 years.
Gregory's voice trembled, but he didn't look down. He kept his eyes on Stephen in the front row.
I called him a small life, small bank account man. I said he'd die broke, alone, forgotten.
A murmur rippled through the crowd, the weight of public confession settling over the room.
But in this program there is a dedication to a children's hospital wing named for my daughter Charlotte, funded entirely by Stephen Collier.
A collective gasp, then silence. Gregory's hands shook as he unfolded the next page.
I never knew all those years. While I mocked him, he was building a monument to my little girl.
Margaret pressed her hand to her mouth. Ambassador Vasquez wiped her eyes. The room was no longer a celebration. It was a sanctuary.
Stephen wanted no credit. He did it because she was family, because he couldn't save her, but he could make sure the world never forgot.
He looked directly at Stephen, his voice steady at last.
Thank you, Stephen, for everything.
The ceremony concluded with a standing ovation, but Gregory was already stepping down, moving through the parting crowd to where Stephen sat. In a quiet corner away from the crowd, Gregory stood before Stephen, his trembling hand resting on his shoulder.
I'm sorry. For every insult, every sneer, I was wrong about you my whole life.
You're forgiven, Gregory. Completely. Just promise me you'll live well from now on.
Gregory leaned down and pulled Stephen into a careful embrace, mindful of his fragile frame. Margaret watched from a few feet away, her hand pressed to her heart, silent tears tracing her smile. They parted, and Gregory wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, a broken smile finally forming. He bent down and whispered something only Stephen could hear, then straightened, lighter than he'd felt in decades. Stephen watched him go, his own eyes wet with a peace that had been 71 years in the making. And as Gregory walked out into the afternoon light, the last of the guests lingered, each carrying a piece of a man who had chosen how he'd be remembered. That winter, snow fell softly outside the window as Stephen lay in his bed, a peaceful silence filling the room. Margaret sat beside him, her hand in his, the gold wedding band catching the pale light from the frosted glass. He passed in sleep, without pain, without struggle. The room held its breath, and then the snow kept falling. Gregory came every day after that, sitting with Margaret in the quiet, helping with the small, unbearable tasks. One afternoon, he drove alone to the children's hospital and stood before a brass plaque on the wall. Charlotte Carter Memorial Wing. Fresh flowers rested on the small shelf beneath it.
She would have been 40 this year, but the world won't forget her now. Stephen made sure of that.
He left a single white flower on the shelf and walked away, lighter than he had felt in decades. The house of Collier slowly filled with the sounds of family again, not mourning, but remembering. And in the center of every table, for the rest of his life, Gregory Vance would raise a glass to Stephen Collier. The first Thanksgiving without Stephen, the family gathered at the same long table, his absence an open chair at the head. Gregory rose, a wine glass trembling in his hand, and the room fell quiet.
To Stephen, the richest man I ever knew, not in money, but in the quiet love he gave away without anyone knowing.
Around the table, glasses lifted one by one, a constellation of small lights honoring a man who had chosen how he'd be remembered. The empty chair held a framed photograph of Stephen, a single candle burning beside it. Gregory's voice broke, but he finished the toast, and every soul at the table drank to the man they'd nearly lost to a lie. After the meal, Gregory walked alone to the hospital wing, the plaque glinting under soft corridor light. He touched the letters of his daughter's name, then leaned a fresh white rose against the frame. And at every Thanksgiving that followed, before the first cut of the turkey, Gregory Vance would lift his glass to Stephen, the man who taught a bitter brother that a rich life isn't measured in dollars, but in the names whispered with gratitude when the room goes quiet.